Welcome to Full Metal RPG. I'm Richie Buzzkill. Here today, I have the great honor to introduce to you my good friend, Kayla. Hi, Kayla. You're on screen.
Hi. Hi, everyone.
We've been playing in the same group. If you've seen some of this, some of my shows already, you got Noland and Showalter. We all play in the same group. I've known Kayla since, I don't know, I think it's been a decade now or plus.
Probably close.
Yeah, but all my friends all went to college together without me. So like they picked up some new great friends, and Kayla is one of them. Kayla is doing a very new, interesting job. She's just now picked up. And Kayla, can you introduce yourself a little bit here?
Yeah, Kayla Balensiefer. I am a licensed clinical social worker, both in Washington, D.C. and in Virginia. And I have been working in the realm of mental health for a while now, about a decade. And recently, I just started my own private practice here in Virginia. With the focus of using geek topics and geek therapy, and most importantly, using RPGs in the individual and the group setting.
Very nice. And when I heard that you were getting into it, because I'd heard a little like in the wind. It's almost in the wind that somebody started talking. It's like, oh, there's this RPG therapy thing. And, how people talk. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. And I need to find somebody to talk about it. And then slowly but surely I start to hear, from Kayla, like, I might be starting to, taking this geek therapeutics training. And I was like, oh, really? So I've been anticipating this conversation. And that's the topic for the evening, is this kind of like RPG therapy, geek therapeutics thing that Kayla has been doing. And I'm really excited. I've been steepling my fingers and eagerly awaiting when you were ready to talk about this. So
yeah, I'm super excited. As we've talked off camera and off mic, I could probably talk about this for a very, very long time. So we will try to cover the basics.
I have recommended, after seeing her notes for just the single show, that she should start her own podcast all about this, because I think she's very enthusiastic. And I want to say something first before we really get into the topic, and that is a disclaimer. Okay, what we're going to talk about here is not for amateurs. This is not. Do not try this at your own table. If you're having mental issues, and who isn't these days? Like, seriously, just look out the window or think about the last couple of years. Please seek professional help. And I really, really appreciate a professional coming on the show and talking to me about this. So,
yeah, definitely reiterate that this is not intended to be a how-to video or topic. It's definitely hey, this exists in the therapy realm, and therapists are starting to do it, and I can't wait to talk with you guys about it. But if you have a friend that's trying to do therapy on you, they're not a very good friend, and this is not something that you should ever try to do on your own friends. Like, just don't.
Yeah, just don't. That's a great. in this day and age, we all try to analyze ourselves. Getting help is not. And by the way, anybody that's listened to enough podcasts know about the online help ads that will be on every single podcast right now. We're not doing that. I don't do ads, and this is definitely not a lead up to an ad about that. So just fair accounting here. So I kind of want to just get into an overview, or did you want to? No, okay.
You're leading this show.
Huh?
I said you're leading this, so go for it.
Okay. I just want to get an overview of what kind of what is this, and kind of, I know you've been working with some people, so maybe mentioning those people, and seeing because it's not what you think it is. That's what really, after some of our earlier conversations, is it, this is not just like, hey, I'm a professional GM that also psychoanalyzes you. Like,
Right. Yeah. So initially, I think people think of RPG therapy as like this new treatment modality, right? Like they're going to go in and somehow this is going to be different than other ways of therapy, and it's just focused on the RPG itself. To clarify, that's not how we're running things. So we're coming from the therapist viewpoint and training first. So, like for myself, I have a very heavy background in cognitive behavioral therapy. So, baking that training, that evidence based practice into the RPG setting. So, I'll take things that I would try to, the cognitive behavioral skills that I would try to take anyways, and put those into an RPG game so that we're playing a game and we're having fun, but we're also coming from an evidence-based approach to work on skills and to have a therapeutic setting and a therapeutic environment.
right. So you're doing a lot of work to get to the point where you're playing a game as part of this, right? There's a lot of work to get to that.
Yeah. So from my side of things, so what did like how does a therapist get involved in something like this? One, you need to be a therapist. You need to go through the training. You need to like you could still be in school and having supervision, but you need to be following the ethics of that profession, and you need to be having your supervisions and making sure that like someone with a license is in charge of you. The next thing, so you need to be a good therapist. And the next thing you need to do is you need to know the system that you're running or wanting to run in. So, like if you're going to choose Dungeons and Dragons, then you need to know Dungeons and Dragons. You can't just like go in with kind of an idea of how that system works and then
How does grapple
try to do
work?
therapy. Exactly.
How does grapple work? I can't talk. Oh, and yes, you need to know but also, I think you were talking about there's also safety tools, right? They're super important for this as
Right.
well. I
So
mean, this is like the most important part.
very true. So I think that RPG games are doing a better job nowadays about making sure that they at least mention safety in some capacity at the table, which is awesome. But there's some more resources available now as well. Like Monty Cook put out their Consent in Gaming, which is a wonderful PDF read. It's free, so I encourage anyone to like go access that, and you can kind of read over like why consent in gaming is important, how you can develop that and use that in your table. What are some of the different methods that people are using, like the X card or lines and veils or the Luxton technique, are some that come to mind. But regardless of what source you're pulling from or what thing you're using at your table, I think it's really important that all tables, not just therapeutic tables, but all tables in general, have some type of safety and consent in there when they're running a game. And the reason that that's like super important is because what we know is that having some experiences in the imaginary world that we create can sometimes butt up against triggers that we have in real life. And the big thing is people don't always know what that trigger is. So they may say, like, you may do a thing at the beginning where people have marked down topics that are no-go for them. But you might get into a game where someone is starting to get really triggered in the middle of the game for something they didn't know was going to be a trigger to them. So having that option of the X card or some other way of giving them the out, because they should always have the ability to consent out of the game, is really important. I would never want to be running a game and have like one of my friends seriously triggered by something that we were coming across and me not know it and not give them the opportunity to get out of it and have them have trauma from that game.
Right. And that's just part of, I mean, that's a basic tool that I 100% stand behind, that everyone should be using at every table. Because I mean, we've been friends for, a decade, and I've been friends with, some of these other people for almost 35 years, like some of them. And I don't know everything that goes on day to day with their lives. Like that's just, and what could, like, things change in a day. Things can change in an instant. Like something could be remembered or whatever. It can be an issue. So please always use that. And that's something you're always going to use at these kind of tables. But so can you tell me kind of how this kind of came up? Like, do you know kind of how somebody kind of started doing this kind of therapy? Is that like, you do like what kind of, because we always say to not do this at tables, right? This is something that we've been telling people to not do for a long time. And to take that and turn it on its head and have, professionals do it, I think will be really beneficial, because I think there's a lot of great work to be done here. But I also am like, how did we get here?
Yeah. So it's not like an entirely crazy concept out of left field. When you talk about role playing games, like one of the things in it is role playing, and therapy for decades now has been using role play as a mode of therapy. So role playing out scenarios to help discuss things, typically one-on-one, but they also use like narrative therapy and retelling of stories and changing stories in group therapy settings as well. So I think it's kind of building off of that a little bit. But another influence is that therapists are getting into role-playing games, especially as role-playing games become more popular, and therapists are sitting there and taking a step back and saying, this would be so useful for me to use with my clients. Like I can see so many positive benefits that could come from this. So just a couple years ago, like you couldn't find a whole lot of information on role playing being utilized within the therapy realm. Now we have a lot of people working on research, trying to figure out like how this is used appropriately, like how the best way to do this is. And we have a lot of anecdotal reports from therapists as well. I think now would be a really good time for me to let everyone know that this is a really new, really cutting edge research topic. So there isn't a whole lot of research out there. There is some things, but it's not like heavily studied like cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectic behavior therapy. Like those things have a strong evidence backing. We're at the beginning stages of that for RPG therapy. Not to say it's not coming, and not to say that it's not helpful and useful in therapy. I just want to caveat that this is something that needs to be researched more. And thankfully, I know a lot of people that are working on their thesis projects now, trying to come up with ways in which we can get a better understanding of this.
Yeah. So there's this portion of the field is just starting to grow out of those other parts of therapy that you were talking, but also just kind of like as RPGs have grown outside of their grognard backroom origins into this more public arena, we start to see more people being accepting. Because I guarantee you, if somebody had said RPG therapy in the 80s, they would had someone burning witches in, like, wait, we're not witches, but like, it's like the people would have panicked even more, as this is, as anything new can trigger people to not want to experience it and want people to not do that thing. So great. So that it's something new to explore, but there's been some successes so far and kind of using this as a tool to help people, right? So
Yeah. So like funny enough, the 80s and the satanic panic and stuff actually started to like spur some research into RPGs and like RPGs in therapy even. That quickly died away. I don't know if it's just because it was coming from a like, this is bad and we should prove that it's bad. And then they didn't prove that it was bad. So it kind of died off a bit. But now with the like growing interest and the growing research coming out, like there's things popping up even like with Geek Therapeutics and also Game to Grow. Those are two companies that are doing actual trainings with therapists. I'm not sure about Game to Grow, but I know Geek Therapeutics, which is what I went through, has a full-on certification program for therapists. So you become a certified a therapeutic game master is what they call it. Sorry, it's not certified. It's a therapeutic game master. But you take like 9 weeks worth of courses, you do a bunch of training hours, and the expectations are that you learn about how to do this in an appropriate manner. And then you're also every week participating in role-playing games and learning how to incorporate that in the therapy realm.
yeah, so you're if you are looking into this, if you start to think, oh, well, this sounds like an interesting idea, find someone that has gone through these courses that has all the certifications, proper therapist certifications, but also these kind of certifications, and ask questions. Always ask questions of people that you want to, that want you to be a part of that sort of thing. So great. That's a great foundation to try and like, so say somebody was willing to start this, right? How would you get started with that sort of treatment? What kind of sessions beforehand, or
Yeah, every therapist that's running things does things just a little bit differently depending on their practice. But I mean, first off, I would start with like Geek Therapeutics or Game to Grow. They have therapist locators, so you can try to see like if there's a therapist in your area. I know Game to Grow is running online stuff right now, so you can potentially get into an online group through them. But beyond that, like you'll probably be looking at least an individual session just to like go over with the therapist like what your goals are for therapy and to talk a little bit more about the group setting. You'll also like probably start to do character development. One of the things that I know the field is trying to do is make sure that there's not a barrier to entry. So if you don't know how to play the role-playing system that they are using, they are supposed to be experts in it. So they're supposed to know enough to be able to teach everyone at the table all at the same time. You can expect a session 0 on probably your first time that you're at the group, where they'll talk about boundaries and rules and expectations for the group, not just for like what y'all's characters have in common and such, but there will be some like group forming questions and making sure that everyone understands where like the no-go topics are, what safety features are available at the table, and general maintenance stuff for the actual group. Beyond that, I think that I think that people are running like between 10 to 12 sessions with the group. Groups are usually closed. Most people are running between 4 and 6 people in a group, because any more than that gets very complicated.
Right. Well, I was just thinking about that because I was like, well, I would almost think that you'd want to go even like a smaller game to try and concentrate on things. But I can sort of see trying to form or design a group being almost a deeply interesting part of this, to try and come up with people that their therapy all kind of works together. Well, I mean, group therapy is a big thing, right? That's a big segment of this kind of thing. But like to try and get people that would come together at a table and have these experiences, right? Is that
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is making sure that people are developmentally appropriate, like developmentally the same realm. Beyond that, like they don't necessarily, you don't have to run a depression group like where everyone has depression and that's what we're working
mm,
on. You could have people that have a mix of things because everyone's different. My anxiety might be different than your anxiety, and trying to like the goals that we have would be different. But the idea is that the therapist knows what each individual's goals are and then can encourage to have things within the game, like can plan encounters around what those goals are to be able to trigger learning moments for that or to like help scaffold those skills into the therapeutic setting. And like when you watch people run therapeutic games, it doesn't always look different than like a normal tabletop RPG that anyone else is running, except for you have a therapist there that can like stop and ask questions about what's going on and process through and help people kind of like look at things in a different way. And I think that's one of the great things about RPGs is that they give us a little bit a buffer zone between like looking at ourselves and our own problems and then looking at our characters and some of the problems that our characters go through. Because it's a lot easier for me to criticize and call out things that are going on with a character, but it starts to feel a little bit more like I'm being personally attacked if I'm talking about my own weaknesses.
right? So is that part of when you are making characters? Are you guiding them to certain kinds of well, I mean, I'm assuming Dungeons and Dragons is part of this. I mean, just because it's the biggest role playing game in the world. But like, are you choosing systems or looking at systems and character creation that helps you create characters that have certain attributes that you can kind of they can explore at the table? Is that part of making characters or even choosing a game for a group?
So I know a lot of people don't limit like what character you can make, but I think that what we know about just humans in general is it's going to be very hard to not make a character that doesn't have some aspect of you, whether it is something that you would like to be or something that's very similar to who you are or someone that is completely opposite and you just want to test out like the oppositeness. There's going to be something that reflects who you are within that character. I think it's hard to get away from that entirely. So, like the long answer to that question is no. You can create what character you want to, but as a therapist, I'm going to be asking questions about why you made decisions to make your character in the way that you did, to get a better understanding of how you relate to that character.
Right. So you're asking, yeah. So you're building up kind of information about their choices on their character as part. And this, I think, this is frankly a good idea for anyone. Is just asking, like, hey, do you want to highlight this thing? You've obviously spent a lot of time on making a character that has, that's a ranger, that's the best in the mountains. Well, clearly, I need to put mountains in my game. Well, that's kind of taken to another granular level. I'm assuming in this sort of therapy is dealing with kind of characters and what they want to do and why they would want to do it, and being able to have people kind of step back and look at themselves, look at the character, and then using that to look at themselves. Is that kind of
Yeah. So, I would want to know like more about why that was important to them and what they were thinking when they came up with those different aspects of their character. Like what are they thinking when they set their charisma level? What are they thinking when they set their strength level? Kind of getting a better idea around that. but always going back to what are your goals for therapy so that I have an understanding of how to use the choices that you've made. So in a way that is going to benefit you through the therapy process. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. It makes a
Okay.
lot. It makes a lot of sense, and that's why this is for professionals only. And there's a lot of balancing going on here. A lot of interest. Things that I have no idea. I mean, I could guess, but I shouldn't. That's the point. Is this is a much more delicate situation than your typical like let's have some beer and pretzels and roll some dice kind of thing. So
Right. And I know like most of the therapists that are doing this like are exhausted after a 2-hour session, which is like seems like a baby session to like to some games. So like I know for our like my personal fun games usually run 4 hours at least, and that's like sometimes we'll get weekend games that run even longer than that. But because it is so much balance on the therapist and so many things you need to negotiate, most people cap off at like an hour and a half session with like half an hour of processing afterwards.
right, and I think we have sort of experienced that somewhat in the everyone moving online, as it's a much more intense situation. But so you're multiplying that by probably like 10 when you're getting into that, like especially if you're the game master, you're not only thinking about running a game, but also kind of what the repercussions of that for the people around the table in this kind of like therapy environment. So I mean, you're designing, you're obviously kind of looking at designing these sessions to be a certain length or a certain time. Like, how do you kind of go about, like, say you have a group or something, how would you go about like designing a session? Is it just a typical game session, or are we looking at adding some kind of extra something extra motivations behind certain NPCs and stuff like that?
Yeah. So, like I said, it's probably going to look a lot like just a normal table when you're sitting down and playing. And that's kind of the beauty of it, is that people get into that, right? They're into the storyline. We know groups are super effective, but normal groups have a dropout rate of like 30 to 60%, depending. So that's not great. You need to be at therapy to get any benefit from
Right.
therapy. But like it's getting people immersed in the story and getting that buy-in and like having the very real feelings of being attached to that character. And there's a term in the gaming realm. I'm not sure if Dr. Bowman came up with it to begin with or not, but like of bleed.
Mm,
So like you can see character bleed both in like when your emotions affect how your character is behaving, that would be considered bleed in. When your character's emotions start affecting, or the things that are going on in the game even start affecting your own personal emotions, we call that bleed out, where
hmm.
there's no longer that boundary. And so like you can think of bleed out as empathy, right? You're having empathy for for what's going on in the game,
Right.
but also that's where like a lot of the therapy work is going to happen, is us addressing some of that bleed out and like why is that triggering and how can we learn from that and how can we grow from that.
Yeah, I've definitely experienced bleed. Like I played 10 Candles and had to go home and like hug my wife because of what happened to certain NPCs in the game, and it was pretty intense. And I could see, if you, especially if you're running like intense 2 hour sessions, like you can really, like if everybody's on board, like things can get really going intense in those kind of short times. I sort of, that's sort of where I lean with running games now anyways, is I much prefer a shorter session to get more people's energy on board with the whatever we're doing. And then we'll have like, we'll just chill out afterwards. Like, but you're talking about it in more, you're having a session after the session. It's almost.
Yeah. So, like, to kind of conceptualize that, right? Like, I might have someone with social anxiety at the table who maybe one of their therapeutic goals is to gain more confidence, to be able to talk to people better, to be able to like be comfortable in that. Um, and like, so one of the things we see in therapy is like knowing that you can do that in the real life is extremely beneficial to reducing your anxiety around that. So like if you think about like Harry Potter, when he has that moment like where he cast his Patronus after struggling so much and he's like, well, I did it because I knew I had already done it. We're kind of channeling some of that. And so like I might have someone with social anxiety who I need to now put into a social setting. Well, basically anything that we do in D&D has the potential to put them in a social setting. So let's say you guys are going into a bar. You have to go up and like there's a bunch of strangers, right? So you have to order a drink, order food. Maybe there is some type of competition going on. Maybe you have to sing karaoke. Like, so there may be skills checks in that. There might be like see how your character does. And then after that, it's the processing of like, well, how was that? Like, did you think it was as bad as you thought it was going to be? And how do you feel that your character handled those things? And asking questions to kind of guide like learning from that experience. So other things that you might hear at the end of a group might be like, what is one thing that you learned from your character today? So that you can process back and reflect on something that your character did that you can take moving forward into the real world. What was one thing that you learned or liked or didn't like that another character did today? And that's where we can kind of like take in group things. So
Right.
people can notice like, oh, I thought it was really cool when this character did whatever, because it really helped the group out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you're kind of, yeah, as things are happening in the game, you're then talking, and this is something that is somewhat happened in a lot of, when you get experience points in a lot of World of Darkness games, is like, hey, my character learned that this dude was this, and that means that I'm able to do this, right? So it's that same kind of like taking the things in the session and breaking them down and talking about them afterwards as part of this, right? So
Yeah, it's a very directed like processing after the group. Not to say that like all of the learning is happening in that processing, because it's not. The learning is happening throughout the whole game. We just want to make sure that the things that we're bringing attention to are things that like will help stick with the person.
right. So what kind of people, what kind of diagnoses kind of benefit from this kind of therapy? Is
Yeah.
it
So like it depends on the therapist that's running, like what kind of groups that they're running. But the only ones that like I've heard through my trainings and through talking with other professionals, like it sounds like most diagnoses are being seen, like anxiety, depression, social skills is a big one. So like people on the spectrum, getting help with different social skills, normal people getting help with social skills.
right?
We have one person who does a lot of trainings that she specifically runs girl groups for like middle school girls and working with them on empowerment and having a voice and being able to say no. And just in general, being nicer to each other.
Right.
So there are people that are running veteran groups and like addressing PTSD within the veteran group realm, which I think is super cool. Again, kind of harkening back to just make sure that the people are like developmentally appropriate to be together. Cause I wouldn't want someone that's like a middle schooler running with a war veteran who's there for PTSD. Like that could be a little
It's a
imbalanced.
that the Venn diagram of that shouldn't overlap. As amusing as that sounds,
Right.
as a comic, it does not sound like a great idea in the real world.
So yeah, keeping that in mind. But I think that like you would be very hard pressed to find anyone willing to attempt this with like people that are dealing with psychosis.
Mm,
Um, maybe that person exists, and like I would say that they would have to have some pretty significant training around that.
right.
Because I think it could get very dangerous very quickly. Not that any of this couldn't get dangerous very quickly in the wrong hands, but yeah, that would make me nervous as just like what knowledge I have. Again, it might exist and maybe someone has enough training to do that, but that makes me nervous.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And yeah, that's kind of that's all of this. I mean, just see disclaimer earlier. It's just it can really this needs to be done very carefully and very professionally. And yeah, I think it's a very interesting subject. Is there, before we get to the patron prompts, is there anything else you want to talk about before we get to the questions from the patrons?
Um, I don't think so. Like,
Okay. All right.
it just really any questions. I'm like I said, this is a really cool topic for me. So I would say like if you're really interested in the idea and you think that it could help you, definitely reach out and get the support. It's been a hell of a 2 years. So like even before that, like things have been rough, but the last 2 years specifically have been really rough. And you are definitely not alone if you are having more exacerbated feelings. I know a lot of people that have never sought treatment before are really coming out in droves at this point because it's like it's been a lot.
Okay. Yeah, no, I completely agree. And that's why I introduced the subject the way I did. So, but our lovely patrons here, our lovely patrons, the crew's lovely patrons, has some questions. And I'm going to start with me poor and is like, how does that work? And I'm like, well, see previous half an hour of conversation, but is there anything else you want to talk that we didn't get into that you might think as an overview as how's this work?
Yeah. Like I think that we covered a lot of it already. There's obviously a whole lot more that could be said, but I think like some things that I will highlight to everyone, things that we do know from research. And one of the things I'm most excited about, given that I work with kids that are like middle school age and high school age, is that one of the research things found that the RPGers are actually about 1/10 the risk of suicide as their non-gaming peers, which is amazing. Especially when you consider that according to the CDC that the like for younger people, suicide is now the second leading cause of death. So it's a big deal. Getting treatment to our younger population is really important. So I think that this could be really great. We also know from research that RPGers have a tendency to be more empathetic and have more empathy towards others, which I think is always a good thing in life.
I think they need to talk to a few more people, but I think that's mostly true from the people I would play with. But there are definitely people that do not have more empathy that I've come across. But
right, and that's a kind of a like statistically statistically different. So you're
right.
still going to have gamers that do not have empathy.
Right. Yeah, but I think with especially with the kids, like from what I understand, like they've basically all been isolated through most of their like 2 years is a huge amount of time, and any person under 18, like they're it's just like, and the school process of socializing is a huge part of growing up and having those groups and all that. No matter how much I would have liked to not been bullied. over and over again as a kid in school. I also met a lot of people, lifelong friends that I'm still talking to. So I could certainly understand why a lot of children are having trouble right now. And maybe, just maybe, you should ask your kids, anybody that's listening, that maybe that if they need to talk to some people. So
yeah, and I think that's how, like, using RPGs to get the kids interested, because it's anyone that has kids this age know that, like from a therapy standpoint, they don't want to talk to me usually. Like, until I'm engaged with the things that they like, they don't want to talk to me because they think this is stupid.
right.
But most kids really like playing games. So getting them involved in something that's interested, even if they're just there to learn social skills and to learn confidence, those are things they can pick up in a therapeutic RPG game.
Right. Kirby, they, them. There are a few reputable programs out there designed by psychiatrists who also play the RPGs for use by therapists in a group therapy. However, it is also common for younger RPG players to think that it's safe to do this with their friends, and it's just not. So more of a statement, but I think we sort of agreed with that. But if there's anything you want to say more about.
Just don't.
Yeah, exactly. Tin Man Prime, he, him. Been interested in this for a while, but only barely looked into it, so I'm excited to see the topic. I'd love to know basic stuff like whether it tends to work better with trad or familiar systems like D&D or even Hero Kids, or even PBTA or diceless approaches are better for group and therapy. So kind of like what systems kind of this lends to. I think we talked about it a little bit, but I think we get a little deeper.
Yeah. So I have the really annoying answer of that depends. Like the therapist should be going from a treatment, like a treatment centered approach first. So know the treatment, know how you like what your therapy goals are, and then look to how you can incorporate that in a system. But that being said, I've seen it incorporated with a lot of systems. So it, like, as long as the therapist knows the system and knows what the treatment goals are and is able to incorporate those, I don't see barriers to using it with one system versus another. I've like part of my training, we used it in Alien, which is a wild system to think about for using. But I can definitely see the potential benefits, especially when you're looking at the veteran population and getting them engaged in a game. I think that Kids on Bikes is a wonderful system. I think it's got a lot of potential, especially like the more narrative driven. I think that a lot of people are using Dungeons and Dragons because it's so well known. But also because it's so well known, it has this glorious effect of once someone's through the therapy piece and no longer needs to be in therapy, it's really easy for them to go to their local game store and get involved in a D&D game, or to continue that with their friends and have like a community to join in with. As lovely as some of these indie RPG games are, I know that it's kind of difficult sometimes to find people that want to engage and play in those. And so I think that's why you're seeing a lot of that with therapists. Also, it's really nice, like programs like D&D Beyond, to have access to that, because some people are really bad at math and some people have really bad anxiety over being bad at math or having to like do that in the moment. So having something set up that they can just push a button and it does the math for them, and then they can just like continue on in that immersion is really helpful.
Yeah, having the computer involved to deal with all of the overhead, I think would be very helpful. And I think that sort of gets into his second question, is what I mean is better in most cases when the more clear structure and hard rules versus open-ended, right? But you're choosing as a therapist, you're choosing things that you're comfortable with as a tool, right? So and you might choose a game if you're familiar with it that's more a certain direction for a certain group.
Correct.
But like you said earlier, you kind of have to become an expert in that game to run it with aplomb and have exactly everything, so there's no question, right?
Right. Because you don't want to be like trying to provide therapy and then like in your rule book looking up rules, especially with games like Dungeons and Dragons, where there's hundreds of pages that you have to flip through of like what's going on. You don't want to have to do that. So definitely, if you're considering this as a therapist, do not make the first time that you GM be in your therapy setting. Like that's like don't do that. Run with friends, go online, get some experience, and then use it in a group.
Yes, absolutely. Get some practice, get up to date, and then, if you're a therapist and you've been trained, give it a go. And I'm sure the training involves doing all those things anyways. So, right.
Yeah, it's wonderful community that I have gotten wrapped up in. We have an active Discord. So like if you're a therapist, like there's people that you can check in with, you can get supervisions from, you can practice within your ethical limits. Because this is a new thing, obviously supervision is very important for us. So, but yeah, just know what you're doing first. The best rule that I've gotten around this is to be a good therapist and a good enough GM. So you should have understanding of both, but like you need to make sure that you are solid in your therapy first.
All right. Some guy called The Show. I don't know who this guy is. I may or may not know who this is. Anyway, he, him, GM, which is an interesting way of having pronouns. Anyways, how does this form a therapy work, and when the different players are presumably struggling with different issues? And I think we got into that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I think that we've talked about that. Like, I just want to remind everyone that like we're all different people, right? So my issues are not going to be the same as anyone else's issues. So it's important, like I said, to just like make sure that you're doing that individual session and evaluating what's appropriate for your groups and having that solid therapy understanding.
Okay. And I think we've covered his other two questions, so he can rant at us later. Anyways, under a bridge, what is the thing as a therapist that you see GMs not doing that you feel like they should or shouldn't be doing?
Yeah, so I think we've covered this as well. I have seen tables that do not use safety tools. And I think that sets up potential for a really bad experience for people. Even people that know how to use safety tools sometimes forget. They don't do that. And I think that just like going back to everyone should have the right to consent in and the right to consent out at any time during the game, because we just don't know. Like, I generally feel like I don't really have anything like no-go topics. And then we get into like some game where there's like blatant animal cruelty. And I was like, nope, that's not for me. We need to not like animal cruelty can be in this world. That's fine, but I don't need to see that on screen. So like people might not know until you're in game, like I said, and just making sure that you have the safety tools and that people know that, because we have people coming to the gaming realm new all the time. It's like, it's definitely a growing hobby and I want them to stay. I want them to feel safe and welcome and stay and have fun. The more people that we have in this means the more times I get to try out new games and get to, have a fun experience with people. So just make sure that it's safe.
Right. And I think to add on to that, I think we need to normalize safety tools in that, like, if you really don't like a direction, like somebody's describing something, even if you don't, or you want to add to their description, just using the X card or using, whatever the safety tool is that is like the at the table safety tool, because there's a lot of great tools that are before the game to prepare it, right? But there's a few XO, red light, green light, stuff like that where, like, hey, pressing the X card, hey, what if you, instead of, jumping jumping off the cliff with the rope between your teeth, maybe you should, maybe you should, use a rock instead and then swing around the other side or something. Like, when you give normalizing that idea, making it something that's normal, because I think that's one of the problems with safety tools is when somebody hits the pause button, essentially, or the X button to say no, right? It's this like kind of like intrusion into the environment, where if you have just any moment like, hey, if you want to speak during somebody else's turn or what they're describing, maybe put your hand out there, or put your arms across or whatever to try and get some attention to add your suggestion to the idea, just to normalize the idea. I think that's important, and I don't. That's why a lot of people I don't think like it. Is it's like, oh, hit the big red button, like cancel, slow, everything down. So
Right. I have a couple of things on that.
Sure.
One, like, you don't want to upset or trigger your friends. So like having that disruption to the line of process is maybe not the worst thing in the world if it means that your friend is protected, right?
Right. Yes.
Secondly, there's so many options available on how you implement safety tools at your table that I think that it like get creative with it, figure out how it's going to work well for you. I had a GM that she was running a Call of Cthulhu game, and she like took a thing where we were all like roles of a movie set or a TV show or something. And her thing was she used lines and veils. And if we were getting up on if we were in a veil area where we didn't want that to be on camera, we had a certain thing we could do. So it was Cthulhu. We could request for this like Miskatonic University book. And if that came up in the time in the conversation at all, someone said Miskatonic University book, that kind of like steered the conversation away from wherever it was headed. And then if someone hit a line and they needed like to not be part of that anymore, they could say, well, I'm going back to the trailer. So
Right.
It was within the realm of like what we were already talking about. It wasn't like we were getting pulled fully out of the system. But we had a way to protect our own psychological safety. In therapy, it's a little different because when I kind of want to know when we're hitting those moments, because I kind of want to process that with them. So it's probably a little bit different when you're at a therapy table, but I would say like, I would challenge anyone that's like, even if you're already running a game and you have not established the safety tools within your game, to figure out what's going to work at your table and to just have that conversation with your people so that they have an out. I know it would be extremely useful. I know it has been extremely useful at our tables. And it's a good thing to do. You're a good friend if you do that.
Yeah. And yeah, I agree with that. And it's every table needs to figure out how to implement that different, so it works for them. And I'm just thinking of like one of the things that, because running conventions and other events where I have tried to say mandatory, like we're in this public space, we need to have this. And I've had GMs rebel, like literally say, we're not coming, like a bunch of them, because you're saying having extra. Now that was years ago. The last time when we did it, there was not as much rebellion, but I think it's becoming.
Come on, GMs. We're creative people. Like, you can figure out how to use this in a creative way.
Right. And I, as someone that, likes horror games and other games where things can get really weird, I think having it is a tool so that you're on even good footing, right? Because that's the other part of the safety tool thing is like, I might go a little further at my home table if I have that safety tool than I might otherwise have, because I think it's important for the story or whatever. But like, also like if somebody wants to bail out, I can quickly just like reel it back and go another way. Like, but it's getting practice, knowing it, and everybody should be aware and be using these things. So
Right. Yeah. That's just a challenge. Just see how it can fit in your table. Like, I think your players will really appreciate it. I know that some of us, like I said, some of us are real chill about that and like don't have a lot of things that that are going to trigger, but some of us do, and some of us haven't told you about like our trauma in our childhood, even if you're the best of friends. So you don't want to be that person that just like steamrolls someone's trauma through a game.
Right, exactly. So, whew, yeah, no, I feel like I've been through a little this. Kayla, is there anything else you would like to talk about before I take care of some business at the end here?
Nope, I think that we've. I mean, I have many more things we could talk about, but in
Right.
respect of time,
Right.
I am good.
And I highly encourage you, after seeing your notes, to either start writing the book you need to write or start a podcast or do both, because they were awesome. And yeah, I'm not going to give them to anybody else, but I think you should put them out there. So
You know what? I actually am going to shout out one thing that I think will be helpful for everyone that's listening. If you are looking to see how DMs can help their friends at the table without going into like the therapy realm, right? Just being a better DM at the table. Dr. Megan Connell has a YouTube channel. It's called Psychology at the Table. Maybe give it a look.
Okay, well, I'll put a link to that in the show notes, as well as a link to your business that you're starting on the East Coast, and you can see if you can help some people that way. So
awesome,
excellent. So the patron, I want to shout out the patrons. The patrons made this possible. They gave me excellent questions. They are driving the show forward. I am trying to move it, and they're the ones giving me the power to move it. So I really appreciate it. Patreon.com/FullMetalRPG. I've updated it finally. I know that if you listen to this long enough, that you know that the levels have not been updated in a long time. I've updated them. Basically, you get into the secret Discord channel when you become a patron. I don't have control of certain other aspects of being able to discount the t-shirts and other things, but I really, when the only place I ask for questions for the show is in the secret Discord channel. And you come be a zealot on the Discord and ask interesting questions, and you make the show better. So I really appreciate it. And yeah, you guys are the best. I'm just saying. Speaking of t-shirts, the Wolfmungus season t-shirt is over. I'm going to pull it down right after the show. You got a couple extra weeks, but you don't know that because you won't see this for at least 3 or 4 days. Anyways, but I will have a new t-shirt by our good friend Ken Duquet. And that will go up about the time this episode goes up. But go see it if you're a fan of maybe some old school logos from our the long ago in the 70s. Maybe you'll like this logo that's going to come up on a t-shirt. And speaking of other t-shirts, like I got my Dare style t-shirt because Dare told us all about drugs and how to do drugs, where I'm about telling you all about using RPGs and how to play them. So I really like this shirt, and I want more people to wear it. So thank you very much, Kayla. I really appreciate you. I want to have you back on to talk about the subject again when you have get more things going on. So
sounds great. Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Well, thank you very much, Kayla. Good night.
Good night.